Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I call to order this hearing of the Readiness Subcommittee of the Armed Services Committee. First, some administrative and technical notes. Members are reminded that they must be visible on screen within the software platform for the purposes of identity verification. Members must continue to use the software platform's video function while attending the hearing, unless they experience connectivity issues or other technical problems that render the member unable to fully participate on camera. If you're experiencing such technical difficulties, please contact the committee staff for assistance. When you are recognized, video will be broadcast via the television internet feeds. You'll be recognized as normal for questions, but if you want to speak at another time, you must seek recognition verbally. Please mute your microphone when you are not speaking, and remember to unmute prior to speaking. Be aware there's a slight lag between when you start speaking and when the camera shot switches to you. Please also remember to keep the software platform's video function on for the entire time you're attending this hearing. If you leave for a short period for reasons other than joining a different proceeding, leave the video function on. If you're leaving for a different meeting, you should and you're absent for a significant period of time, you should exit the software platform entirely and then rejoin when you return. Be advised that I've designated a committee staff member to mute unrecognized members' microphones if necessary. Please use the platform's chat feature to communicate with staff regarding technical and logistical issues. Finally, there is a 5-minute countdown clock on the software platform's display, but if necessary, I will remind you when your time is up. Next, I seek unanimous consent to permit a non-committee member to participate in this hearing after all committee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Is there objection? Seeing and hearing none, so ordered. And that non-committee member will also have the normal 5-minute period. Now, with that out of the way, a few opening remarks. First, I welcome my guest. I'll introduce you at the end of my short presentation. While the Pentagon spends billions in taxpayer dollars on planes, ships, missiles, and other sophisticated weapon systems, more troops are dying in training than in combat, often in aging and poorly maintained war machines. Between 2006 and 2018, 32% of active duty military deaths were the result of accidents, while 16% of service members who died during that time were killed in action. Even as combat operations overseas have decreased, non-combat deaths have exceeded the number of military members killed in action every year since 2015. The toll is staggering. The National Commission on Military Aviation Safeties, whose findings we will be discussing today, found more than 6,000 aviation mishaps between 2013 and 2019, killing 224 pilots and air crew. The Government Accountability Office is nearing completion of their review of 4,000 tactical vehicle accidents over the past 10 years that have led to the loss of 120 soldiers and Marines. Of course, we continue to remember the 17 sailors lost in the Surface Navy collision of 2017, and another 9 who recently lost their life off San Clemente Island in California. Let me be clear. Whether the trends are rising, falling, or facilitating unpredictably, any preventable loss of life is unacceptable. It is shameful that the nation with the most powerful military in the world loses more service members in non-combat settings than in war. While the services focus on the conduct and the results of individual accident investigations, I fear that we are missing the bigger picture. These mishaps reveal that the basic elements of manning, training, and equipping are challenged across the force. In addition to causing loss of life, this neglect is diminishing the readiness and effectiveness of our military. We have seen in recent years that in order to pursue modernization initiatives, the services have shortchanged unit manning, flying and training hours, depot maintenance, and spare parts. This leaves our operators insufficiently trained and equipped, and too often unavailable for use. It's poor material and condition. This assumption of risk is not a foregone conclusion. The services can and should choose to shift their priorities to elevate manning, elevate training, and elevate safety and sustainment. This may mean buying fewer new ships and planes. It also means taking seriously the cultural factors that the Navy, the GAO, and the Aviation Commission have all identified. Specifically, a widespread complacency towards safety standards and a casual disregard for basic risk management practices. And finally, it should also mean taking meaningful steps to curb the combatant commander's insatiable demand for the use of the force. I know these are hard choices, but they are the right choices to avoid creating a force that is not only hollow, but vulnerable. Now with that, I yield to Ranking Member Lamborn for his opening comments. Mr. Lamborn.
Thank you, Chairman Garamendi. Today, we will hear testimony from the Vice Chiefs of the Navy, Army, and Air Force, as well as the Vice Commandant of the Marine Corps, about their efforts to learn from and prevent non-combat mishaps. I want to thank all our witnesses for their time and service to our country. I also want to welcome my friend and colleague, Representative Vern Buchanan of Florida, to this hearing. We owe it to our servicemen and women to eliminate preventable accidents, period. Readiness is not just having enough spare parts on the shelves or enough aircraft to fly. Readiness is also ensuring our service members are proficient in their jobs and prepared to perform their duties that our nation assigns them. This requires lots of time spent in tough, realistic training conducted in a controlled and safe environment. Unfortunately, this is not always in ready supply, particularly when there is unpredictability in the defense budget process and an insufficient top line that forces leaders to choose between executing the mission today or preparing for the future fight. This is something we in Congress have the power to fix. Over the past several years, our subcommittee has held several hearings and briefings focused on military aviation safety, the state of surface, Navy readiness, and ground vehicle mishaps. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to ask that you mute your at your end. The services in the GAO have also engaged with their own analysis, studies, and programs. In 2019, this subcommittee directed the GAO to conduct a review of the relationship between tactical vehicle mishaps and training, vehicle safety, and training range conditions. While that review is not yet complete, we expect it will provide insights into the factors contributing to nearly 4,000 tactical vehicle mishaps over the past 10 years, leading to the loss of 120 service members. When the report is available, I expect the recommendations to be implemented. We continue to see a trend in deadly aviation accidents. The fiscal year 2019 NDAA created the National Commission on Military Aviation Safety to assess the causes contributing to military aviation mishaps. Results of that effort indicated that insufficient training and experience, sustainment issues, funding, op-tempo, and workforce attrition were all contributing factors. I expect to hear today what the services are doing to address this. Since significant incidents and collision in 2017, the Navy has conducted 2 primary reviews. 5 years later, it is not clear that the reforms instituted are enough to protect our sailors and Marines. Quite simply, we need to do better for our service members. Today, our witnesses will discuss these important efforts to address underlying issues driving accident trends and share the extent to which each military branch has taken steps to implement concrete recommendations to mitigate and prevent accidents. Finally, I would like to mention trends. While trends are important indicators of success and failure, we must not be complacent when trends are looking good. One Class A mishap or loss of life is one too many. I'm particularly interested in how the services are looking at Class B and C mishaps, as well as near misses, to examine root causes that may inform proactive solutions to more serious issues. I want to thank the witnesses for your engagement today on this important topic. I look forward to hearing how your service is taking actions to prevent today's accidents while we all work to ensure that service members have the time, tools, and training to be successful in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Mr. Lamborn, I'll unmute and you can mute. Good lesson for all of us. I'm going to introduce each of the participants separately. I'm going to start with General Joseph Martin, Vice Chief of Staff of the Army. I was running through your resume and you've covered almost every possible place and commanded or otherwise been in charge of something in every possible place where there could have been an accident. So I suspect you are well versed on this entire set of issues. General Martin, you've got 5 minutes and your written testimony will be placed into the record. Without objection, so ordered. General Martin, please.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of the Subcommittee on Readiness, on the behalf of the Acting Secretary of the Army, the Honorable John Whitley, and the Chief of Staff of the Army, General James McConville, thank you for this opportunity to discuss how the Army learns from training mishaps and how we're preventing future mishaps. Also, thank you for your steadfast support to our soldiers, our civilians, and our family members. It's clear you have the best interests of our brave men and women at heart, and I appreciate your shared concern for their safety and well-being. As you know, the Army is a people business. Our people are our number one priority. We know they're on loan from their families and the American people and are our greatest strength. It's our responsibility to create a safe work environment where our soldiers are able to learn, to grow, and to achieve the results that they need to in those goals. We're working hard to create an environment free of harmful behaviors like sexual harassment, sexual assault, racism, extremism, and suicide. But it doesn't stop there. Placing our people first also includes creating an environment that's conducive to the conduct of safe and effective training at the individual and crew levels where mishaps tend to occur. We've made some progress over the past few years. For fiscal year 20, Army aviation mishaps dropped to a 10-year low. This was not at the expense of readiness or flying hours. Over the same period, our combat aviation brigades reported the highest overall readiness levels, and our active duty operational readiness rate remained above 80%. For ground vehicle mishaps over the last 5 years, our average is the lowest since the Army began to keep records in 1972. This fiscal year, but that doesn't mean that we're satisfied. This fiscal year, we've lost 11 soldiers to Class A aviation mishaps and 2 soldiers to Class A tactical vehicle mishaps. That's 13 soldiers who won't be returning to their families. That's 12 families who'll never see their father, their mother, their son, or their daughter again. This is completely unacceptable, and we won't be satisfied until all of our soldiers return home safely from their training events or deployments. Our Army is a learning organization. We conduct professional, in-depth investigations into each and every mishap. The United States Army Combat Readiness Center ensures we understand not only the causes of mishaps, but also formally staffs and tracks recommendations. Our process gives us a good understanding of the why. Most of our mishaps result from a failure to follow the appropriate standard or a failure to respond appropriately to the conditions of the environment surrounding that particular soldier or weapon system. Training and discipline and disciplined risk management is the key to our success. With our focus on training and repetition at the lowest level, we'll increase the proficiency of our soldiers in our formation, and we intend to decrease the number of mishaps across the board. I look forward to this discussion and your questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, General. I will now turn to Admiral William Lesher. Again, just running through your resume, you seen almost every possible place where somebody could have an accident. And so please speak to us. And again, 5 minutes, and your testimony will be in the formal record without objection. So ordered. Admiral Lesher.
Thank you and good afternoon, Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and the distinguished members of the House Armed Services Subcommittee on Readiness. On behalf of the sailors, civilians, and families of the United States Navy, I thank you for the opportunity to testify today on this important topic of service mishaps and the impact of these mishaps on our people and our readiness. Our nation depends on a Navy that maintains the advantage at sea. To provide that Navy, we must effectively learn from mishaps. We must share that learning to accelerate insights and best practices, and we must institutionalize that learning to drive sustained change to behavior. Today, we also see a strong opportunity to accelerate a number of emerging initiatives to mitigate risk before the mishaps occur. We're increasingly using data-driven prioritization of risk countermeasures and data-driven understanding of root cause to complement and eventually reduce reactive, mishap-driven understanding of risk. Examples of this approach span all of our major warfare communities and have been contributing to an overall Navy trend of reduced mishap rates. As was mentioned earlier, the tragic 2017 collisions involving the USS Fitzgerald and the USS John S. McCain were a wake-up call and a strong impetus for today's progress. The surface fleet aggressively engaged on broad reform, implemented safety teams focused on human factors and risk analysis, and developed comprehensive crew endurance management policies that are producing a cultural shift within the surface fleet. A lower threshold as well for sharing concerns and insights and increased reporting of lower level events and near misses has also served to strengthen the surface community safety culture and lower mishap rates. The overall trend in our surface fleet is positive, but a significant area of sustained poor performance remains. The Bonhomme Richard fire last July marked the 15th significant shipboard fire in the past 12 years, and it's demonstrated that previous leadership interventions of the type the fleet commanders aggressively instituted this past July and October have not resolved the shipboard fire root causes sufficiently to drive enduring change in the frequency of these mishaps. Early this year, I directed a separate, broader, deep dive review to eliminate systemic issues regarding the standards, culture, and environment driving the daily discipline in shipboard stowage, cleanliness, and readiness, and to recommend necessary actions to establish enduring change in fire safety culture and practices. In 2019, naval aviation Class A to D mishaps declined for the first time in a decade, and in 2020, the declining A to D mishap trend continued with 0 Class A fatalities achieved for the first time in a century. However, we also saw Class A mishap number increase slightly, and Class C aviation ground mishaps increase. To accelerate learning here, naval aviation has increased the use of flight line spot checks, employed predictive analytics, what I'd love to talk about more in the hearing, and leveraged lessons from the surface and the submarine communities. We've also pursued a more effective approach to training, requiring aviators to earn the right to fly through demonstrated proficiency in both fundamentals and tactics in a range of simulators. These actions have put us in a solid vector to continue reducing aviation mishaps and improve safety outcomes. Our submarine force had 0 groundings or collisions in 2020. This is the result of leaders driving outcomes with a strong analytic tool, TOBY, and it highlights units at increased risk of adverse safety or operational outcomes. We also used the increased use of near miss reporting and analytics and strong discipline in implementing lessons learned from prior near misses. The submarine fleet has been contributing well and overall to Navy improved safety performance by broadly sharing a number of best practices with our service and aviation enterprise, as well as the Naval Safety Center. Across all of these warfare communities, our focus is on ensuring that we are setting our sailors up to succeed in executing their missions with the right training, the right tools, and policies underpinning a strong, well-functioning safety culture. I look forward, Chairman, to exploring these topics further with the committee today, and I thank the committee for your leadership and your partnership in sustaining focus on the critical issue of safety performance.
Admiral Lesher, thank you very much for your testimony. Again, we'll look at your written testimony, and yes, we will get back to predictive analytics somewhere during the course of this hearing. Our next presenter is General David Alvin, United States Air Force. General.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lamborn, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, on behalf of the Acting Secretary of the Air Force, John Roth, and Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force, General C.Q. Brown, Jr., thank you for the opportunity to provide an update on this important issue and for your continued support and advocacy of our most important resource, our airmen. Safely executing the high-end training required to preserve the readiness during this era of renewed peer competition is incredibly important. Your Air Force remains committed to building a culture of safety that preserves the considerable investment that the American taxpayer has made in our service, and more importantly, safeguards the sons and daughters placed in our care. Our focus remains on preventing mishaps before they occur. We have strong programs that proactively identify risk and are consistently looking for ways to make our operations more effective and safe. And when the mishaps do occur, we are committed to learning from them through data-driven analytics and a continued focus on a readiness culture so that we can prevent similar occurrences in the future. While our overall Class A, B, and C mishap rates have all declined since we formally briefed this subcommittee on the subject in 2018, we continue to have unacceptably high rates of training mishaps, including 7 that cost the lives of airmen last year alone. As you said, Mr. Chairman, 1 avoidable mishap remains too many. We're all committed to doing all the things we can to bring down those risks. Our internal analysis, recently bolstered by the December 2020 release of the National Commission Military Aviation Safety Report, highlights several key areas that can help contribute to safe and effective training and an operational environment for our airmen. These include sustaining investments in our flying hour program, reinforcing the aviation supply and maintenance system, a culture of transparent communication and accountability, returning bandwidth to our line units for reinvesting in training, expanding access to high-quality simulators and training devices, and retaining the seasoned operators to build the next generation of airmen. We look forward to partnering with the Office of Secretary of Defense, our joint partners, and this subcommittee to fully capitalize on the Commission's insights to deliver the safe and effective training environment that our airmen and our nation deserves. Thank you again for your interest in safety, your advocacy for the same, and for your continued support to fund these activities to keep our airmen safe. I look forward to the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, General Alvin. We'll now move to our final presenter, General Thomas of the U.S. Marine Corps. General Thomas.
Chairman Garamendi, Ranking Member Lambourne, and distinguished members of this subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on the issue of learning from and preventing future training mishaps. As the Commandant stated in his planning guidance, the Marine Corps is a naval expeditionary force in readiness, and that readiness is a strategic warfighting advantage for the nation. In order to maintain that strategic advantage, we must be able to train to and operate in austere environments at sea, in the air, and ashore without unnecessary sacrifices of personnel and equipment. Over the past several years, the Marine Corps has diligently worked to reduce training mishaps. We have taken an institutional approach to improving safety performance, including a new standards-focused safety management system, better reporting and information sharing tools, and service-wide changes based on investigation findings. While we have made significant improvements, there is still much work to do. Ensuring institutional change occurs and lasts is my personal priority. Leadership remains the bedrock of Marine Corps initiatives to improve safety culture, reduce mishaps, and increase readiness. The institutional changes I just mentioned, among others, are empowering our leaders to encourage greater hazard and mishap reporting, incorporate lessons learned, and make better decisions. Active leadership enabled by resources will help us to continue to reduce mishaps and generate readiness. The Marine Corps remains committed to ensuring the safety of our Marines, sailors, and civilians as we train to be the most ready when the nation is least ready. As of today, we've had 0 fatalities in aviation or ground training mishaps this fiscal year. We are working very hard to maintain this as our standard. We appreciate your support and oversight as we continue to improve our safety performance and advance the lethality of the nation's Naval Expeditionary Force in readiness. I look forward to answering your questions.
General Thomas, thank you very much. I will now go to the question and response part. Before I ask my opening questions, I'm going to read the gavel order so that everyone has an opportunity to know who they will follow. As is the tradition, I'll open Mr. Lamborn, and then the Courtney, followed by Wilson, followed by Spear, Moore, Strickland, Scott, Slotkin, Kaylee, and Buchanan. We'll go in that order. So let me go ahead and begin here. The National Commission on Military Aviation Safety concluded the high rate of aviation mishaps can be attributed to numerous factors, including inadequate pilot training, maintainer training and experience, insufficient maintenance, unpredictable funding. I think that's our problem, and hopefully we will address it. And then a high operational tempo that causes fatigue and burnout. And so to all of the witnesses, I will go at this in the same order. We'll start with the U.S. Army. We're talking aviation here specifically. Mr. Martin, General Martin.
Chairman, thank you. So we've been through thoroughly briefed, and I've read cover to cover the National Commission for Military Aviation Safety, its findings and its recommendations, and we're tracking that 17 out of 25 of them are applicable to the Army. We've already implemented 4 out of those 17, specifically maintenance proficiency badges, Hearst tempo tracking, tuition assistance for our airframe and power plant service members and their credentialing, and then restoring the home station flying program by supplementing it this year with OMA dollars to bring up the proficiency level training of our aviators. There are several other efforts that we're doing to get after some of the recommendations within there, but of significant import to the Army is the insufficient flying hours, and we've addressed that with the flying hour program supplement, and then decreasing proficiency. I've signed out a memo, actually 3 memos to the force to direct them to focus on the proficiency levels and also isolate the mechanics so that the mechanics focus on maintaining the aircraft and they're not distracted by other activities. And then the last one I'll talk that's of importance is the relentless op tempo, and we've attacked that by telling our commanders and assisting them with this is to decrease the number of CTC rotations that our aviation brigades are participating in. They're still participating in every rotation, but it's not a combat aviation brigade per rotation. That's had a significant impact on decreasing the op tempo in our formations. And so there's a couple examples of some of the things we're doing to get after the findings.
Yes, I need to unmute. Admiral Messer, you're next, Admiral.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, very quickly across that appropriate list of things for us to be focused on. Pilot training. I touched on it briefly in the opening comment. What we have seen since the National Commission on Military Aviation Safety, which had many findings that were very much on the mark, one specific context element that changed from when they visited Lemoore and they visited and talked to Navy is the journey we've had in driving mission capable aircraft up. So they were at a point where we were 55% mission capable. Today we're sustaining 80% with an important journey that's beyond the scope of this conversation. That in terms of pilot training, both the use of more available aircraft, mission capable up aircraft is helping. And also the sims I talked about, where we have, I think one of the areas where the commission said, hey, are we using too many sims? We're using sims in a way I think that's powerful. And we're seeing in terms of outcomes, things change. The standard scores of pilots through training are increasing with the use of the sims. The time to training is decreasing, and the same number of flights are being flown. So in terms of the actual events, so the sims are very complementary, and they're creating a better output. In pilot training, for sure, one thing we are keeping a close eye on is recovering from the time when the T-45 in our advanced strike training engines suppressed throughput at the same time as we were also recovering from physiological episodes. And so we are working hard to get back that capacity with the training pipeline of pilot training. Continuing. Maintenance training, happy to talk at length. I think we have a strong program here, and we're evolving it from our current A school, C school construct to ready relevant learning and distributed learning. Insufficient maintenance is an interesting observation. I think as we talked about briefly yesterday, Chairman, the insufficient maintenance is not the issue. We have learned through 2 deep dives in F-18 and E2 maintenance that actually a maintenance program reset to update the maintenance program to current configuration, to current components, has indicated that we are doing maintenance at a periodicity bound required, in some cases maintenance not required, from an engineering driven perspective, never Syscom doing the analysis. And so I think that's an important element for us to look at. Unpredictable funding, I appreciate working with a committee to help us here. I would highlight 2 instances. OPN 8 spares have an impact on readiness. We, unfortunately, in the Navy trained the committees to mark that account with poor execution in 2 to 3 years ago. But in both OPN 8 spares and the flying hour program, we are executing those programs strongly. And we would like to work in partnership with the Readiness Committee to bring those across the line in the Defense Appropriations Bill. Finally, op tempo. The fleet is stressed for short. We are looking to strongly control op tempo. We are looking to control schedule churn within that high op tempo. The response there is to have strong programs in place to assess and assist our people, and strong leadership as we work through the world getting a vote and the strong op tempo. Back to you, Chairman.
General Alvin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as I'll repeat what my colleague said, these are 4 very meaty issues that I think are definitely worth a deep dive, and we have given it one. I would say that coincidentally, the same year that about when this commission started its work, we had our operational safety review, and we found many of the same issues. So we've been able to move out with some things. And so I will go down the list as well. With respect to pilot training, as you know, Mr. Chairman, we have a bit of a throughput problem, and we need to have a long-term pipeline problem with the pilots. And so we have undertaken a new way, looking at what the next pilot training approach, to make sure we have more immersive training, to make sure it's something that is more amenable to individualized training for each of the UPT students, undergraduate pilot training students. But I'll repeat what Admiral Lesher said about aircraft availability. You know, with our T6s, we tackled, along with the Navy, some of these physiological event issues, and that impacted the availability of the aircraft as well as the safety while in flight. And so through some great work through our physiological event action team and working with the Navy as well, we've seen a 5-fold decrease in those physiological events, which not only is more safe operation in and of itself, but it actually increases our confidence in that particular training platform. But a renaissance in the way that we train pilots to make sure that it's consistent with 21st century education and training techniques is key to our way forward there. With respect to maintainers, we saw the very same thing, that the idea is really about the experience of the maintainers. And part of this is they're so interlinked with some of the other challenges we have. Part of our transition into the modernization was to leverage some of our maintainers and have them be maintainers in the new fleet. But as we continue to struggle with being able to divest the legacy fleet, we find that we are stretching our maintainers thin. So we, since 2017, have added 4,000 maintainers to the fleet. So that is a good start. But obviously, if you add 4,000 new maintainers, then the relative experience of your entire maintenance fleet drops down. So we need to help season those maintainers. And through the things like credentialing and other things, we're looking at incentivization to keep those maintainers in their career field, but also keep them doing the maintaining, which is something that the commission also pointed out. You know, have pilots fly, have maintainers maintain. And so we also cut back in 1,800, additional administrative assistants to do the admin work that some of our pilots and maintainers were having to do. So we slid some of that back because we found, as a product of what we had done almost a decade ago of trying to cut as much manpower as we could to save money, that we had people doing more than just their core competencies. So we reversed that. We've also did a scrub and reduced 46 additional duties that just weren't adding value and consolidated another 15. But the idea of keeping maintainers on the track and getting them more experience is we're moving hard on that one as well. The funding, Mr. Chairman, would be greatly appreciated. And the high tempo, we really are managing risk, and we look at the demands that come to us from the Joint Force, and as they come to our service, we manage risk and look at the readiness of the force and the availability to do that. And we do our very best to meet the demands as they are given to us. But we have a keen eye on the relative risk over time that is becoming an increasing burden. Buying down today's risk at the expense of tomorrow's. That's one thing our chief and secretary are looking more and more at, because we don't want to be the force that 20 years from now they look back and said, you were the guys who left us unable to compete against China, for example.
General, thank you very much. We're now looking to final person to speak to this issue, General Thomas, if you'll bring us up to date on the Marine Corps with regard to this oversight by the Commission.
Thank you, Chairman. The Marine Corps agrees with the Commission's findings, and we're taking a deliberate look at all of the recommendations, but we particularly agree with the observation on the power of consistent funding, and we thank this committee for their support in that regard. Many of our ongoing initiatives are aligned with the Commission's recommendations. For example, reducing op tempo of our operational forces is a key aspect of that, and we have been able to reduce the demand signal on many of our units over the past few years. Improve qualification tracking, of course, improving material readiness, and ensuring that our aircrew get adequate flight hours. In all of these areas, we have seen improvement. As my teammates mentioned, with regard to pilot training, we also have, in some ways, a throughput challenge. We are working closely with our Navy teammates to do simple things in terms of increasing the number of instructors and standing up a second fleet replacement squadron for F-35 as we begin to scale. Those initiatives, along with some of the 21st century learning approaches that Admiral Lesher highlighted, are going to, we believe, greatly improve our posture. In terms of maintenance personnel, it is primarily a function for us of maintaining our experienced base. It's largely a retention issue, and we are getting after that with re-enlistment bonuses of $20,000 for very experienced maintainers. And we've noticed that over the past few years, 2,100 Marines have taken us up on that incentive. We appreciate the opportunity to use the report to also help us improve our safety record as we go forward.
General, thank you very much. A lot more to be discussed on each of those issues, and I expect my colleagues will tease out other details along the way. Mr. Lamborn, it's your turn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I know that the services are focused on identifying contributing factors to Class A accidents that involve high dollar amounts, permanent disability, or death, but the near misses, the Class C mishaps, and the present but not contributing factors in Class A mishaps can reveal the canaries in the coal mine that could cause the next accident. And along the same lines, in August 2018, GAO found gaps in DoD's approach for collecting, reporting, and analyzing the data from mishaps in general. So a two-part question for each of you. What are you doing to act on the problems that lower level mishap incidents reveal? And what steps are you taking to improve the reporting of data on all of these mishaps? In no particular order, unless let's go in the same order that you testified earlier. So
Congressman, there's two things I'd like to talk about very quickly. So born at our combat training centers, where we've got probably the highest fidelity and clearly the most dangerous conditions, where we train in a live training environment. Born out of the CTCs is this what we call the mishap pyramid. It's based on a German bird and germain theory that if you have so many near misses, they'll equate eventually over time to so many Class D accidents, so many Class C accidents, so many Class B accidents, and in the end, you're going to have a catastrophic outcome and a Class A mishap. And so literally at our combat training centers, they count the number of accidents. The observers, coaches, and trainers, they tell on, they report on all the accidents, the units required to report. And so there's a summary reports, and literally you watch the volume of accidents come in, and it allows the leadership to see in each of the after action reviews, hey, we've had so many of these types of accidents, we're on our way to a more severe outcome. That's proved out pretty beneficial, and it's changed the culture in our home station training environments as a result of that. And so that bird and germain theory that was born out at NTCs applied to the rest of the Army. And that's how we look at lower mishaps, because you remember, especially when you're talking aviation, the difference between a near miss and a Class A accident in some cases is fractions of a second. And so we've got to be mindful of near misses. And then the second point I'd like to bring up is in October last year, we launched the Army Safety Management Information System, where we replaced a clunky industrial age process of accident reporting, where you had to fill out the same form no matter if it was a cut on a finger or an aircraft hit the ground. It was the same accident form. It was very laborious, and it was somewhat daunting. Well, with this new system, we can see a lot more accidents. In fact, we have 97% better compliance rate and timeliness rate of turning in accident reports, because if it's a Class D or a near miss, it's something that can be reported very quickly. And it also includes a non-attributional anonymous feature where you can report an accident and no one will know you reported an accident. And so we think that ASMIS, the Army Safety Management Information System, is going to help us better see that data on those lower severe outcome accidents to inform our changes to our processes and our procedures in the United States Army. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to hear from the Navy next. Navy, are you there? Admiral.
I'm struggling with the mute unmute. I think I'm up now. So I would build on what General Martin said in a couple of ways. For sure, the site picture is correct that Class Cs are near misses are a fundamental driver of us learning, understanding, and taking action on them. We've been looking at Class Cs, and I think in a number of hard ways, interesting ways. One element I'll start with that is not a success yet is convergent training. So we went to the airlines and aviation and looked at fundamental training of elements that are often the root cause of aircraft move accidents and the type of accidents we see that generate Class C mishaps. And what we've seen after 18 months or so of that is that it's not moving the needle. And so, again, we're very focused on understanding where we're just seeing activity and where we're seeing outcomes that are fundamentally addressing root causes. And so what we learned with convergence training, which is fundamentally pre-post move alignment on a quick run through of operational risk management, it wasn't moving the needle. Two things going forward that I think are high potential. We have 2 years now of experience using an aviation experience metric that correlates with readiness, that lets us really understand and allocate our people in a way that maximizes readiness. We call this the aviation maintenance experience metric. It looks at type model series experience. It looks at qualifications such as quality assurance qualifications. and we can use it very effectively. We're doing an offshoot of that to look at aviation bosun mates, which are the people on our flight decks, on our big deck amphibs, on our aircraft carriers, who are doing so much of the activity that's at risk of being a Class C when you bump an aircraft in a move, et cetera. And we see that there's initially from the data already that we could be much more informed about understanding with this analytic approach the experience of an aviation bosun mate in terms of familiar with that type of ship, in terms of number of deployments, in terms of other fundamental quals, and use that to allocate that and make sure, for example, on specific shifts or specific moves, that we have a properly experienced supervisor driving the evolution. So I'd highlight that as one element. Another element that is going forward, we have some experience working with industry on specific rigorous problem-solving process, which is basically a deep dive effort in a very disciplined way to find root causes. And we had an opportunity to do 3 of these pilots, and one of them is in fact Mishaps. So I'll pause there in the interest of time, but same slide picture. I guess, I'm sorry, the second question was on data. Do we feel we're getting the data? I think you're tracking, sir, we are using and have joined now the same risk management information database and approach as the Air Force and the Marines. And so standardized data sets, and while it's a moving target, you're 98% complete in terms of the current target, in terms of data completeness. So our sense is that we're on a strong vector to make sure we have standardized, complete data to help drive these insights. Over.
And briefly, the Marines and Air Force.
Sir, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Gary.
Thank you, General Alvin. Just Congressman, in terms of how we are, acting on the problems that these lower level mishaps reveal, we are looking at it through 2 lenses. First, hazard reporting, followed by information sharing. And this is something that General Martin spoke to, but I would also like to emphasize is that we've introduced new tools that not only makes the reporting of hazards that Marines see much easier, we've also made it where they are anonymous. And it just encourages Marines down at the deck plate to identify those things that they may see, every single day. And then we're able to aggregate those and look at it across the entire institution. And then in terms of information sharing in the Department of the Navy, of course, we have this streamlined incident reporting system, as well as a mishap lesson learned website, again, that makes the lessons learned that have been cataloged over a number of years readily available to commanders, O5 commanders on a daily basis. In terms of the data collection, again, I'd like to emphasize something that Admiral Lesher said, that we are completely aligned with the Navy in fielding this streamlined incident reporting system. It is a Department of Navy initiative that is based on a very successful and mature Air Force system. He mentioned that we have standardized data. I would just add to that we actually use the same data collection fields. And as he said, I think we're 98% common in terms of our approach. And we, look forward to continue supporting ongoing standardization efforts to improve data collection across all the services.
Okay, thank you. And very briefly, for the sake of time, Air Force.
Yes, sir. I will be brief because most of the things I said have already been said. We also have a very robust, we investigate every Class C mishap that happens at each wing. Those get elevated all the way up to the 4-star level, and the results of those are reviewed on a semi-annual basis, and every one of the findings of every one of Class C, Class B, Class A mishaps are tracked to closure at the 4-star level, and that allows us to see not only individual incidents, but across incidents for trends. With respect to the data, we have all of those same things. The database is getting getting better. The fields are consistent, so we can start reading each other's data, learning across service as well. And we also have the identity protected inputs that allow our airmen to be able to identify hazards and identify culture and climate issues with respect to safety that they may not otherwise be able to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
A good set of questions, great answers. I'm going to give the gavel order once again. Courtney, Wilson, Spear, Moore, the next four up. Mr. Courtney.
Great. Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ranking Member Lamborn, for holding this hearing and to the witnesses for their testimony. Admiral Lesher, on page 3 and 4 of your testimony, you talked about the sort of post-Fitzgerald and McCain reforms. Again, there was the comprehensive review, which we went through on the subcommittee back in 17 and 18 with the 111 recommendations. Many of those were actually codified in the NDAA that year. And, I was noticing where you kind of updated the fact that the readiness certification of the crews has now reached a 100% certification process, which is actually a pretty shocking improvement. When GAO did the report back in 2017, the certifications were really actually kind of frightening in terms of how low many of the sailors and the crew were. So I wanted to just see if you could sort of explain, was it giving the type commanders more power, because that obviously was identified as a problem in terms of the tug of war between the type commands and the operational commands? I mean, is their ability maybe to sort of pull the safety brake, as Admiral Richardson said back in those hearings that we held, forcing the issue where we make sure that everyone's certified before a ship goes underway? Is that what's happening?
Yes, sir. It's good to see you again. And that's exactly what's happening. I mean, your instinct's exactly on the mark. So Roy Kitchener at Surf 4 and Brendan McLean now at Surf Lands we put the fire brakes in, which was a fundamental diagnosis of we had lost the fire brakes between the maintenance, the training, and then the deploy phase. And so in terms of a culture change, which I hinted at a bit, there's a fundamental culture change of ending this idea of waivers. There have been no waivers. They require 4-star level now. And there's multiple examples of where, from a man, trainer, or equip perspective, the TICOM has said to our fleet commanders, hey, I've got to change this engine. I've got to redo this exercise. I've got to have the time to do this right. And they are supported. So your diagnosis there is correct, sir.
Well, it's really encouraging to see that, again, people got their heads together and identified what the problem was and solved it without, again, it really didn't require necessarily, infusions of big amounts of money or resources. It was just really trying to change or put in safeguards. Congratulations to the Navy for making that happen. General Thomas, your report and your testimony at the end talked about the AAV accident that took place in San Clemente, the tragic accident. So it's my understanding, so a report is imminent in terms of, describing, I guess, what, the Navy, the Marine Corps' investigation produced. And one question in addition to just that is, was the use of those AAVs paused in the wake of the accident? And has there been any modifications made to those platforms during that pause?
Thank you, Congressman. Just in terms of the investigation is complete. We are informing the families of the investigation findings this week. Making sure the families are informed and answering their questions is a priority for us, and we look forward to releasing the results of that investigation near simultaneously to the committee once those family notifications are complete. In terms of the actual waterborne operations, they were suspended to complete a review of our equipment, our procedures, and training. With a couple of exceptions, the first 3-star in the chain of command has the ability to waiver that in reasons of operational necessity. For example, we are conducting limited water operations to complete entry-level training requirements. And we're committed to ensuring a safe return to water ops as soon as we can. And to your question in terms of the vehicles, when we suspended water operations, we did a thorough inspection of all vehicles from whether related to any concerns about this particular mishap or not, and reported that and made some, just maintenance effort to ensure that all of those vehicles were within standards.
Great. Thank you, General. Appreciate it. And I'm sure, once the report is out, we'll continue this dialogue. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Courtney. There's a great deal of interest among the committee members on that particular issue. The timing didn't work out well. We will probably do a briefing, and any of the members of the committee and any others that want to involve themselves, either next week or the following week, probably the following week. We'll see what happens here. And General Thomas will invite you back for about an hour to discuss that particular incident. Very good. Okay, we're now going to turn to Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member Lamborn. We appreciate the dedicated panel participating today. Extraordinary individuals on behalf of our country. We appreciate it. Admiral Lesher, to further the excellent review by Congressman Courtney, I was grateful to visit the USS Fitzgerald in Japan several years ago and saw where our sailors were tragically killed, and appreciate your efforts to make sure an accident never occurs again. The Navy concluded that fatigue was a contributing factor to both the McCain and Fitzgerald collisions. The substantial body of research indicates that the fatigue causes impaired judgment, decreased concentration and reaction times, and contributes to poor mental and physical health. This issue is not isolated to the Navy, but how has your service made progress on changing the culture of sleep deprivation on ships and submarines? What lessons learned can you pass along to your teammates?
Thank you, sir, for the question, and I appreciate you getting on site as well. There's been a comprehensive culture change, most starkly in the surface community. So my background, I grew up as a helo pilot that deployed on our surface ships, our small surface ships, as an HSL pilot. So I consider myself a student of the surface warfare culture, and it was a stark difference. I, as an aviator, would get up and I would have my crew rest, and I would ensure I had a circadian rhythm before I would fly. And my teammates across the passageway did not have that same discipline. And there was an element at times of the SWO culture where it was a point of pride to operate sleep deprived. That has fundamentally changed, and it fundamentally changed with Roy Kitchener, our surface three-star SWO boss, implementing an instruction this year, the Comprehensive Crew Endurance Management Policy. And the community had been thinking about this idea of setting the watches to preserve circadian rhythm, to preserve crew rest, to preserve sleep, but it had been dabbled in. Roy made it a requirement, a policy, and when you go aboard our ships now and talk to the sailors and ask them to talk about how they stand their watches, you'll see that that has been made a requirement, and it's a part of the fundamental culture. The other elements that are interesting is there's quite a bit of ongoing work on all the elements you talked about, fatigue, sleep deprivation, with Naval Postgraduate School. So the service community has worked closely with them. One other element I would highlight in the surface community is there's experiments going on right now, a pilot going on right now as we speak aboard Essex with 300 sailors using a wearable device. So they're reporting, you've seen these commercially, either the core ring or the hoops, athletes use them, and the sailors are having these assessments of how they've slept, et cetera, available to be brought into a watch bill software to optimize that as well. And it's not just the surface force. Again, in the interest of brevity, I'll go fairly quickly. The submarine force, I think a couple of years ago, they shifted from 6 to 8 hour watches. They're doing a lot of ongoing work as well with the medical community and MPS on lighting, on meal schedules, on training schedules, and in aviation, notwithstanding that we've had strong fatigue management in the aircrew. What's new, starting in 2018, is our 3710 instruction, our general NATOPS instruction, mandates that we apply that to the maintenance professionals and the admin folks as well. So now it's not just aircrew, it's one team, the full team, maintenance as well as aircrew, being focused on being properly rested and properly prepared to do their mission. Over.
Well, as a Fitbit fan myself, I know how you can maintain person's sleep habits, and so that's very, very helpful. And General Martin, I'm really grateful to represent Fort Jackson. And in the NDAA, there was included an amendment that requires DoD to examine emergency response capabilities and services in the military installations to explore the benefits of requiring medevac helicopters and fully stocked military ambulance to be more readily on hand to respond to training accidents. What progress has the Army made to adopting these requirements?
Congressman, thank you. It's good to see you again.
You're here.
We're aware of the amendment. I've actually read the amendment itself, and OSD has not tasked that out yet. We anticipate it'll be forthcoming, and we look forward to supporting the study that's in the amendment to take a look at it. That being said, as a former senior commander of 2 installations in the United States Army, I can't tell you how important it is to have appropriately equipped and rehearsed medical capability that's responsive at each and every one of your installations. I couldn't agree more.
And thank you very much. As a Army dad and also a Navy dad, I'm really proud of what you're doing. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Ms. Spear, you're up next.
Mr. Chairman, I want to
Tom.
forego my turn for about 10 minutes so I can get to my destination and ask my question when I'm not in a car.
We'll be watching you, and when we see you settle down and start bouncing around, we'll call on you. Thank you. We'll skip then to, I suppose we need to go to a Democrat, so that would be Ms. Strickland. You're up, and then we're going to go to Mr. Moore. Ms. Strickland, we jumped ahead and didn't give you much warning. Mr. Moore, then you're up, and then we'll get back on track.
Excellent. Thank you, Chairman. Generals and Admiral, thank you for being here. My district hosts the Command, Mission, and Control Center for the Utah Test and Training Range. This is a top priority for them. They have a great track record. They make this very much a priority. So thank you for the work that you're doing to get here. And I would actually just like to call out the commission, as I've gone over the summary here. This is it's very poignant and provides really good information, and encourage my colleagues to really dive into this. But insufficient experience, high ops tempo, and workforce attrition, I mean, those are real issues that can directly go towards training mishaps. And the solutions that are provided are flying hours and retention bonuses. I welcome comments on that. Let me ask my first question, though, to General Alvin. Also in the commission reference, sustainment challenges and unpredictable funding as contributing factors to training mishaps. Could modernization and optimization efforts, specifically at test and training ranges, are these going to help mitigate some of these challenges?
Congressman, thank you for the question. I definitely think that that there is a link to that. The quality of the ranges and the ability to get the type of training, which moving forward, trying to replicate what is an advanced threat and not having the right sensors, the right support equipment, all of that will force us to try and train a different way. And anytime we train a little bit differently than how we fight, it has 2 impacts. One of those is we have less confidence in our ability to actually prosecute the targets we need to, or penetrate the airspace we need to, et cetera. But the other part is it actually, once you start detracting from that, you start going off script, and there are safety impacts to that. And so I do believe that there is a linkage there. And I believe that as we move into a more modern range structure and support, our big challenge is going to be in the transition. I mean, if we could fast forward and look into the future and have everything modernized and all of the flight support equipment, all of the platforms at the same level of technology advancement, we'll be in good shape. But trying to bring legacy systems in the same environment as the new systems is going to be increasingly challenging. And I think there's not only readiness risks, but there's training efficiency risks. And when you have training efficiency risks, safety often comes along with that. So I would agree with that statement.
Thank you. And as I've interacted with commanders at our Air Force Base here in Utah, they know their airmen best. I feel like there's a great relationship that they have. And as we talk about the fact that retention bonuses haven't necessarily worked, even though it's part of the solution, they haven't necessarily worked in keeping them from going to commercial aviation. Do you feel that squadron commanders have the adequate authority to be honest brokers when negotiating aviation bonus contracts?
I think squadron commanders, I think they do have the authorities. What we need to do is ensure that the analysis that we do gets communicated and transferred to them so they can best advise, because you make the exact point, Congressman. They're the ones who interface with the aviators, and they're the ones who understand what the value proposition is for those aviators, whether an extra X $1,000 is really what's going to seal the deal for a longer commitment, or if there are other levers that the Air Force should be pulling. So we have aircrew summits very frequently that discuss this. What do we think the sweet spot is? And of course, that varies with the economy, as we know. But the economy is just one variable. We have to do the best job of understanding what that pull is, but also understanding how to better communicate the value proposition of what the Air Force offers, and working on all those other issues that are quality of life, quality of force, that will keep them there beyond just the dollar values. Because if we're trying to go one for one with the airlines, as the economy picks back up again, it'll be a losing proposition. We've seen that a couple iterations over the last decades.
You just answered my next question, because I was going to ask to what extent is ops tempo a part of that, but you've addressed that with quality of life. Ops tempo, the need for the mission, like that got them in that seat in the first place, and encouraging them to do their. I will leverage the last few seconds with continue to talk about workforce attrition. They leave critical vacancies in the organic industrial base. Do you believe that the DoD has adequate hiring authorities to address workforce attrition and the growing competition?
In the very brief time I have, I would say that those are indeed challenges. We see not only diminishing manufacturing sources for the equipment and supplies, but also to get the right labor market in to be able to do the rapid innovation that we need to keep up. That's going to be critical. And that's, I'd love to talk more on that as well.
Yeah, we focused on airmen, but obviously there's so many more job opportunities that we can maintain that talent. Yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Moore, and thank all of our committee for being very attentive to the time, as well as the witnesses. Appreciate that. I see Ms. Spear is still in her car, so we will skip back to Ms. Strickland. If you're with us, it is your turn.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Service members put their lives on the line to serve our country, and obviously we have to do everything we can to ensure their safety. I'm concerned, however, that Congress has found itself having to create commissions, and some of these services have had to launch comprehensive reviews after the series of incidents. And these actions make it seem as though the safety offices may not be properly resourced or connected to these accidents. And so I have a few questions. Do safety offices have the capacity, the ability, and the authority to identify and investigate the root causes of training accidents? And I would like to direct that toward General Martin and also General Alvin.
Congresswoman, thank you. Appreciate the question. First and foremost, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to personally invite you and any other members of the community for a visit down to the Combat Readiness Center at Fort Rucker, Alabama, so you can see the exquisite capability we have there that we use not only to identify the root causation of each accident, but also to manage the data that comes in from the various accidents that are reported across the board. As it pertains to the capabilities within each formation to ensure that we mitigate risk. In the United States Army, risk mitigation is a commander's program. It's enabled by safety professionals, and those safety professionals are placed throughout our ranks in our formation, and we use them to help us as subject matter experts and also conduits to the rest of the enterprise as they talk to each other about different things to help commanders promulgate safety programs. But that being said, we've recently done a study based on some information from a GAO audit to take a look at our manpower. And we're looking at increasing the number of safety professionals we have at certain locations in our formations to get after some more of that additional subject matter expertise that we need to make sure we enable that commander's program to happen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. I think it's a very important question too. I believe that one of the most important parts of our safety program is sort of the independence that the safety apparatus has per se. I think the idea that at the squadron level, if there are levels of mishaps that are the lower level, that's well handled within the squadron. But once the cost of lives or resources elevates, then that comes outside of the chain of command. And so the idea that they have the authority that without influence, within the particular command, to be able to have access to the resources, we immediately, when an accident happens, we immediately sort of sequester that and make sure we hold the evidence, if you will, and then we bring in, if the accident is serious enough, we bring in external, so they will have free reign to have all the information they need and the reporting chain that comes all the way up here to the headquarters. I think we could always, and I will agree with my Army colleague Joe there, we could always deal with having a greater number of people to be in there observing and have more safety professionals. But I do have confidence in the independence of our entire safety system to have access all the way up to the Chief of Staff.
Okay, and then one more question. Can you tell me what percentage of training accidents occur between active duty, National Guard, and reserves? And again, back to our Army and Air Force leaders, because I am responsible for JBLM.
Congress.
Yes, ma'am. I'll jump in real quick so we can get back to General Martin. I do not have the specifics. We have them broken out by aviation and ground, but I can give you very detailed. If I can take that for the record, we can have that back to you post haste, because we do have those broken out, but they're separately between aviation and ground incidents. And I understand. Thank you for JBLM. I was stationed there at one point.
All right, thank you.
Congresswoman, I need to take that for the record as well, if I could, please.
All right, thank you for your answers. And again, thank you for your service. I yield my time.
Ms. Strickland, that was a very interesting question. It not occurred to me that we really need to look at the three different pieces that make up a full unit. And maybe there's a significant differential. I'll be interested in having that information.
Thank you,
Ms. Spears is no longer bound. If you'd like another 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go for it.
Let me start off by saying to this distinguished panel before us, in my recent visits to some of our installations, in terms of evaluating the culture and the status of our service members, it's amazing how forthright spouses are. And at a recent visit to Fort Hood, one of the spouses said to me, in an open gathering of spouses, that the concern of the op tempo was so great that she would come home at night and was always afraid that she was going to find her husband in the shower hanging. So I encourage you to create opportunities to meet with the spouses. I'd like to go back to the AAV incident, the tragedy that happened last summer that Congressman Courtney had spoken about earlier. Only 7 of the 16 Marines survived. And I understand that part of the problem was the escape hatch and their inability to open the escape hatch. Has that issue been resolved? This is for General Thomas.
Thank you, Congresswoman. As what I would say is, while the investigation is complete, we are about halfway through notifying the families of the investigation findings, and that will occur during this week. As you know, making sure the families are fully informed and answering their questions is our first priority. We are happy to come back to the committee and discuss, questions about the material readiness, specifically to your question on the escape
All right,
hatch.
it sounds like you're not going to answer the question right now, and I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to move on to another issue. The ACVs are now in production, and they have wheels instead of tracks. They're similar, I understand, to the LAV 25s and can operate at 60 miles per hour and climb a 60-degree angle, and in many respects, very similar to the LAV. An Orange County Register article recently indicated that Marines were very concerned about this new vehicle. They were concerned about the turning radius and the potential for rollovers. So I guess my first question is, will the ACV training be more rigorous, and how are we going to protect against rollovers?
Congressman, rollovers for any armored vehicle is always a concern. We in 19 we had 7 rollovers on the tragic loss of several Marines. In 20 we had 2, and in 21 thus far we've had 0. We have to, for all of our vehicles, including ACV, we have to improve our training to avoid these types of mishaps. One of the things that we are doing is we're increasing the number of driving events or training events for all the crews going through that particular syllabus. And we're one of the things that we're doing with our new safety management system is for commanders of all these units to characterize the risk that they face in their particular location and their mission, and then to ensure that they are providing adequate supervision, detailed planning, and detailed debriefs for all of these missions that involve these vehicles.
All right. So in terms of a more rigorous training that is being contemplated, how do we guard against rollovers? If there are risks that we frequently are encounter.
Congresswoman, what I would say is this. The best way to do that, there are several areas that we've identified that are causal factors, to rollovers. As I mentioned, one of the things we have to do is increase the number of driver training events. We also have to make sure that our ranges are very well understood and all hazard areas are very well marked. And then it gets back to detailed planning with the crews, with supervision of commanders. And that is the way that we're going to prevent those rollovers.
Are there simulators that are available in the marketplace to practice potential responses to rollovers?
We have simulators as a part of our training system, which have very good capabilities, but the Marines have to do actual training in the vehicle itself in rough terrain that takes into account all the other factors that I just described.
All right, my time's expired. Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member.
Ms. Spear, while you're still available, the issue of the AAV off the coast of California. It did come up next week once the Marine Corps is finished with the families. And we'll let everybody have a few days advance notice. That'll be a telephone briefing.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. The gavel order remains Scott, Slotkin, Hilay, and Buchanan. So Austin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, one of the reasons we have fewer combat instances that lead to death is because of how hard we train inside the United States. And while I do agree that, we need to certainly limit as best we can, but the rigorous training is the reason that we don't lose more men and women in combat than we do. And so, we can't cut all of the risk out, especially with regard to EOD training and high risk training, and expect that our men and women are going to be prepared for combat when that situation and the need for their expertise arises. And so, with that said, General Alvin, one of the things I was very impressed with is when the Yankee 72 accident occurred, is how good the investigation was with regard to narrowing down exactly, what led to the accident, and then how fast the Air Force responded to changing the processes with regard to the propellers. So I want to just tell you, the loss of life in Yankee 72. We obviously mourn those soldiers and the sailor that we lost, but I was pretty impressed with the investigation that came about. In your testimony, you talked about maintenance effectiveness and how maintenance effectiveness drives higher aircraft availability rates, and then the availability rates leads to obviously the amount of training that we're able to do, and hopefully that leads to fewer accidents. The advanced manufacturing technologies like 3D printing, robotics, and artificial intelligence that the Air Force is now using to improve maintenance timelines. Can you describe some of the sustainment challenges and the remedies of those challenges that are driving low aircraft availability and fewer available training hours, and how we use these advanced methods to fix that?
Yeah, Congressman, I'm happy to do so, because I got to say, this is one of the more exciting areas that I think we can really make some progress in. And it starts with the data. It starts with being able to have an analytic baseline to do this. And I think a couple of things that are going on: the condition-based maintenance, which is not something we invented in the Air Force. The airlines have been doing it for a while, but the idea of theory of constraints and taking sensor-based analysis, putting sensors on particular parts of the aircraft and testing them and monitoring the heat, the vibration, et cetera, is really going to help. I would like it to go faster. I would think one of the reasons why the airlines have really advanced theirs as much, because as you know, Congressman, one of the things about being able to do AI and machine learning, you need lots of data. You need massive computing power, which we have. We need lots of data. And so the airlines have been able to take lots of data for like type aircraft and move that forward. Ours, we have a little bit less of a homogeneous fleet and missions, but we're moving out on that and trying to find those things through the theory of constraints and look at those long lead items, and understanding we also have to have an aggressive diminishing manufacturing sources and material solutions program to be able to understand not only what are the parts that are going to be the critical path that are going to need to be maybe proactively replaced, but also when you got diminishing manufacturing sources, to your point on some of these additive manufacturing techniques, we may be able to generate those parts without having to go and be sort of vendor locked or have single source suppliers. So those are just a couple of the areas. I think it's just a broad area that we can really look into a new way of extending and making sure aircraft availability is at its peak.
Thank you, General. And I just, for the committee's sake, I mean, it's if we want to increase the level of flying hours, then we have to increase the aircraft availability, and that gets back to, I think, the predictive maintenance and some of the other things that we're doing that make more planes available for our pilots. And so, again, I've been impressed with the ability to find out exactly what caused an accident, the ability to remedy that so that it does not happen again. And thank you all for your service. And again, we've got to train hard because we fight hard. And You know, the reason we have the reason we're as successful in combat as we are is because we push the limits inside the United States when we're training. With that, I yield.
Thank you very much, Austin. And also, General Alvin, you touched on a couple of things we've discussed before. The condition-based maintenance is one, and then Austin just used the other word, which is predictive. These two things, this committee is way into this. And then the analytical information. So the gathering of information from ancient, I guess, clipboards that are sitting in some file someplace on a C-130 that's 40 years old. So we want to gather up all that information. We're going to push this really hard because it does deal with the safety issue as well as the flying hours and all the things that we've talked about here. And I got all of you gentlemen up here. I had an earlier meeting this morning. I'm going to go to Ms. Slotkin in just a moment, but we had an earlier meeting this morning about a company that is able to produce things that are not available anywhere. That broken piece that you absolutely have that you can no longer cannibalize from some piece of airframe somewhere. I'm thinking that we might have a virtual session and invite into that session any and anybody that thinks that they can meet this particular problem, a very acute problem of parts and pieces that are no longer available and no longer can be cannibalized. And then to get the appropriate people on and let them strut their stuff, and you guys can go from there. Okay, enough from me. Ms. Slotkin, you're up. Elise? Hello? Elise, if you're out there, we'll come back to you. I'm going to stay with, then that would be Mr. Kalahi. Now, given that it's still 3 hours earlier in Hawaii, Kai, if you're available. One more call to Kai. Kai, if you're out there, it's your turn. All right, we now turn to Mr. Buchanan, and not a member of the committee, but we've run through the committee members. I believe we're going to have a couple of committee members that will return after you finish, Mr. Buchanan. Your question.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Ranking Member Lamborn for this opportunity. Today, I'm from the Tampa Bay area in Florida. I call on the committee to hold a public hearing on military training accidents last August. So I want to thank you for that opportunity. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I became involved with this issue after being contacted by one of my constituents, Kimberly Weaver, and learning of the heartbreaking and preventable death of her son, Army Specialist Nick Pino. He's a 20-year-old. Nick died in a training accident at Camp Humphrey in South Korea in 2019. A tragic series of errors and training failures contributed to Nick's death, including a lack of medical services on the base and significant delays in a medical response to the scene of the accident. Nick eventually arrived at the hospital 2 hours after the accident and died from his injuries later that day. That's why I offered an amendment last year, the NDAA, which has since become law, requiring the Pentagon to examine emergency medical services and capability at U.S. military bases around the world and outside, ideally, even in the U.S., but outside the U.S., and report back to Congress. Gentlemen, I want to thank all of our witnesses here today. Thanks for your leadership. We've got the best military on the planet, but we can always, as someone said, do better. And I guess one of the things when we started looking at the facts of this is that in 2017, just 1 year, but they had 20 killed in combat and 80 killed in training. And then as we looked at it, there's many times where there's quite a few more killed in training than in combat. So General Martin, I'd like to get your thoughts on where you see what's acceptable. I mean, we don't want to lose one airman or one person in the Army, but I'd like to get your thoughts in terms of when you see these numbers, so many more getting killed in training than in combat. How do you respond to that?
Congressman, first and foremost, my thoughts and prayers go out to that family. My son's a soldier in the United States Army, and I can tell you, I can't imagine a day without him. And it's just got to be. I can't imagine it. And as a former commander of 2 installations and commanders of formations across the board, in and out of combat, I'll tell you that every single one of the accidents that I've seen happen are preventable. They're all preventable. And so with that in mind, we can never, ever stop our relentless efforts to get after mitigating risk in our formations. What we do is very, very difficult. We ask our soldiers in our formations to do a lot. And in order for them to be able to do the mission that they do, there's a lot of dangerous activity. So commanders at echelon are required to mitigate the risk of their formations. They're required to certify their soldiers on their equipment. They're required to ensure that as those soldiers operate that equipment independently, they do it under safe conditions. A risk assessment, identifying all the hazards and mitigating those risks is done in concert with that. And if they're operating in a tactical environment, commanders are responsible for their operating environment, the soldiers beneath them, to identify the hazards that are in that environment and mitigate those risks. And on that day,
Hey, General, let me ask you, because we just got a certain amount of time. Why didn't they have, in the case, you might not know exactly, but in Korea here at the base, they were training medevac helicopters and fully stocked ambulance overseas. It seems like we don't have as much capability immediately to help these young men and young women. Ideally, I'm sure some places are better than others, but that's the sense of what we came up with in terms of Korea on this base.
Congressman, I've read that accident investigation cover to cover, and based on my experience, I would call what happened in Korea an anomaly, and a very unfortunate anomaly. And so I understand the amendment that you've introduced that's become law, and I understand that we're to conduct and explore a study into exactly what the capability is across all of our installations in the Army. I can tell you the 2 that I served at most recently, both installations, that was the standard, but we need to make sure. And so we're committed to support the efforts of this study. And again, I am so sorry for the loss of your constituent's son.
And let me mention, General, I was very disturbed when I learned from Nick's mother that he didn't have a license to operate the vehicle. And I don't know, but it sounds like a serious vehicle. You would know, M2A3, a Brady fighting vehicle. It sounds like a serious vehicle. But there seems like there's no requirement for training, no classroom instruction before you start to road test these. In fact, according to a sworn statement from his unit master driver, his comments were their unit driving training program is non-existent. We have the greatest military in the world, the greatest leaders, including yourselves. How can something like this happen if that's the case? Again, a serious vehicle, no training, he's out driving it. It doesn't even seem possible to me, but I'll let you respond to that if you have any sense of it.
Congressman, that's a classic example of a deviation from an existing standard. Army Regulation 600-55 in its current state and the state that it was back then required all drivers to be trained and certified. It's a 3-phase program that hasn't changed. The rigor of that program has changed with the changes in the regulation, but he should have been. And he shouldn't have been able to operate the vehicle without a license. And because of that, in the administrative investigation that resulted from that, there was negligence that was identified at multiple echelons in the command, and the chain of command took appropriate action against those individuals who failed that soldier on that day.
And I'll just tell you, the family, Nick's family, would appreciate assurances that steps will be taken going forward so that parents don't have to go through this again. And I think that's the reason I got involved and active in making sure we pass this bill. But also, they just want the assurance from the Army and from you that we're going to do everything we can to make sure something like this doesn't happen again.
To his family, my condolences. I'm committed to making sure that doesn't happen again.
Thank you, General, and thanks for your leadership. And again, we've got the best military on the planet. I know things happen, but again, this is, I'm sure, will provide a lot of reassurance to Nick's family. Thank you and God bless.
Mr. Buchanan, the hearing record will be available and you could pass that on to the family. You just heard from the Vice Chair where the U.S. Army is on that question.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to visit today, okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Before we start a second round, we've got about another 25 minutes before we're scheduled to terminate.
Mr. Chairman, if I could, this is Congressman Green. I haven't had a chance to go yet. I'm in the queue, I think.
Actually, you're not, but you certainly did the right thing.
Well, thanks
Shout
for,
out.
thank you.
Yeah, go, your turn, Mr. Green.
Well, thank
Dr. Green, go for it.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate that. And Ranking Member Lamborn, thank you too for holding this hearing. I want to thank all of our witnesses for being here today and for their life of service to this great country. And General Martin, it's a pleasure to see you leading at this level. My family, with a young infantry officer serving in the 101st Airborne Division, sleeps a little better knowing that you're the Vice Chief of the Army. For the rest of the members on the committee, I served as a flight surgeon and took part in numerous investigations of accidents. The impact of these on families and on the unit, even the entire service, is profound. And we just heard, as one of our members questioned about a death of a constituent. It is horrific, and we need to ensure we're giving these leaders the resources they need to train for war in a safe way. You can't zero risk, but the better resources services are, the less likely accidents are to occur. It was stated earlier in testimony that training impacts accidents. If you train less, the potential for accidents increases. And I recall from my days in the Army that the Army had a minimum number of flight hours for each aircraft type below which they expected accidents to increase. And I wondered, from our Air Force, Marine Corps, and Navy witnesses today, do you guys have a set number of flight hours per aircraft below which you expect accidents to increase?
Congressman, since you said the Air Force first, I'll go ahead and lead out with that. We actually, in the Air Force, we don't have a predictive measure that just has number per aircraft. It really is on an individual basis, and sometimes individuals fly multiple aircraft. There is a window that we do watch, and that happens down at all the way at the squadron commander level. And let's say for a multi-crew aircraft, there's a certain amount of hours when we look in, perhaps an aircraft commander, once they achieve maybe over 100 hours as an aircraft commander until they get to an instructor level, that there's a certain threshold in which they're a little bit more likely because they feel very confident and they haven't had their refresh. So there are periods of vulnerability.
Yeah, I remember that in the Army. The Army had that too, where over the course of a pilot's career, there was that point where they got a little overconfident, and then a point where that sort of went away. But I meant, do you have a measurable? It sounds like you don't. Perhaps Navy, Marine Corps, just yes, no. Do y'all have a set number per month you got to hit, or you expect accidents to increase?
Congressman Bill Lesher here quickly from the Navy. We do have a number we use. It's called tactical hard deck, and it varies by the type model series, but it's something we track closely to keep our aviators above the tactical hard deck. When it does have that feature you talked about where they're seen as a knee in the curve for propensity for mishap. Over.
Could you get that number to my office? I'd really appreciate that. And our Marine, General Thomas, do you guys have that number?
Congressman, we do. We're aligned with the Navy on the tactical hard deck. It does vary per type model series, but nominally 15 hours from a programming perspective is what we shoot for.
Obviously, dollars in the DoD budget determines flight hours, whether it's maintenance dollars or fuel costs. Could I ask each of you, if the DoD budget is cut 10%, will the flight hours decrease per month? And if so, if we cut this budget like some people are suggesting, can we expect more accidents if those training hours go down below that hard deck?
Congressman, I'll answer first from the Army. It's good to see you as well. I hope you're well. Regardless, we've got to train our formations, and you've got to have the courage to never quit. If you do that, you'll be able to see the mission through. 10.6 hours for our active component. It's 10.6 hours per crew per month. It's 6.5 hours for Army National Guard, and it's 5.7 hours for United States Army Reserve. And just to answer a potential follow-on question, the reason why they're different is because remember, it's 5-year cycles for Guard and Reserve for training, where it's active component, it's less than the 1-to-5 ratio. It's 1-to-2 ratio in terms of deployment to dwell, and so that's why those numbers are different. But if the dollars go down, our home station flying program could be impacted. I can't guarantee that because it depends on where we prioritize that in reference to all of our other operational maintenance requirements across the Army. But it's something that we're going to have to watch very closely. Consistent and sufficient funding is critical to our aviation training program.
One quick question for you, General Martin. If you could talk a little bit about how the Army is doing risk management training for the company grade level. I know I've seen some of the senior grade, brigade commander level stuff. Could you talk about what needs to be improved and sustained in the company grade level? And that'll be my last question, Chairman.
Congressman, I'll answer. Mindful of your time, I'll be very quick on this. We train it in all of our professional military education courses, but we also train it in our pre-command courses. But really where the training happens is that our combat training centers and what has happened at home stations as a result of that. It's something we ram home often as we continue to train in a very dangerous collective training environment.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Dr. Green. One of the fortunate things is this committee has members who really have a lot of experience in specific areas. And you were drilling into an area, Mr. Green, that I'm going, I want you to continue to drill down on those things that you are interested in.
Yes, sir.
We are going into a second round of questions here. I would start with myself, but I've had the opportunity to talk to all of these gentlemen prior to this hearing. So I won't add at this point, other than to make I'll make my closing comment, and then Mr. Lamborn, you want to come up with any second round of questions? Before you do, Mr. Lamborn, there's a couple of members of the committee that may have returned. We skipped over. Ms. Luria, if you're here, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is good to be able to be part of this conversation, and you wanted to focus specifically on the Navy. And I know that we had these 2 tragic incidents in 2017 with the USS Fitzgerald, the USS John S. McCain, and Admiral Lesher. In your testimony, I was very interested in that section. You specifically outlined the 111 recommendations that were made in the follow-on report. And in your testimony at the bottom of page 3, I just wanted to see if you could provide some more clarity on this statement. Improvements have been made in surface warfare officer training. And then you list some other items. So do you have specific metrics you can cite to say what improvements have been made and how you've been able to measure theirs over time since 2017?
Yes, ma'am. So I know you're quite familiar with the Readiness Reform Oversight Council. So some of the metrics would be in the training itself. Again, I know you're familiar with in terms of the basic division officer course, the JOD course, the certifications, the assessments that come out of that. So those are certainly tracked, as well as the go no go process on those elements. Some of the other metrics in terms of manning, we for sure keep track on fit, fill, and TICOM manning actions, critical NEC shortfalls. In terms of training metrics, the milestone assessment performance I talked about in the SWO man progression, looking at the logbook data, again, I believe you're familiar with that analysis. SWO qualification timelines is a metric that's important. Tier 1, Tier 2 certification scores, and then equip, again, CMAV figure of merits, insert performance, deferred maintenance. Other metrics would include near miss reporting trends, and I think I highlighted in my written testimony. We're seen as part of the strong culture change that Roy Kitchener is driving a strong increase in reporting of near miss and HAZREPs as well. So I would highlight those as some of the metrics that we use to keep a close eye on the implementation of the RDY.
Well, thank you. And it sounds like you've developed quite a few metrics. Are there any problem areas within that data or negative trends that you've identified over the course of the last 4 years and since implementing these? And I also noticed that you mentioned that you've improved in combined integrated air and missile defense and anti-submarine warfare training as well. Are there any particular areas within that are of concern?
You know, I would highlight, ma'am, as probably at the top of the list of concern right now is insert for material condition. I think you were offline earlier when Congressman Courtney asked about how we were driving some of this change, and really by bringing alive the power of the TICOMs and the TICOMs to have a strong voice on, hey, do not progress. I have to replace this engine. I have to redo this exercise, and the fleet commander is listening. But in terms of so I think that's a strong element. In terms of where we can do better, as we look at insert performance, I look at PMS and look at the ability, do we have the proper manning to do the maintenance? And so this is leading to some thoughtful conversations about things such as, and was touched on by the chairman earlier, some of the condition-based maintenance pilots we have on Detroit. We have one on a DDG, one on an LPD, as well as bringing in some of the lessons we learned from aviation journey, where we went from 255 upjets for 10 years to today's 341. And part of that journey was controlling maintenance demand signal. And this was a really interesting journey where we saw, for example, we had the Naval Aviation Systems Command to do a deep dive on the F-18 and then the E-2 maintenance program. We were doing maintenance at a periodicity beyond what was demanded from an engineering perspective, and in some cases simply hadn't been updated. So I know Roy is looking at this, so both condition-based maintenance and maintenance reset to properly scope the PMS to get after some of these in-serve trends.
Well, thank you. And I know that it's been a recent topic of discussion among several members of this committee and CPower that the current law does not continue to require the Navy to report in-serve findings to Congress. But I hope you would agree that it is both a useful process and inspection and very useful data for those members of Congress to understand the readiness of our ships. And we look to include language that will continue those reports because I think they're very meaningful. So thank you again for your testimony today, and I yield back.
Thank you much. Thank you very much, Ms. Luria. We'll begin a short second round. We've got about 10 minutes. Mr. Lamborn.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to just quickly touch on technology as a tool to improve safety. For any one of you, what technologies might be useful to make operating on training ranges safer while still maintaining the tactical feel of operations? And whether it's currently in operation or in the development stage that you're aware of, are any of you able to answer that question?
Congressman from Army, I'll go ahead and start. I'll be quick so my colleagues have an opportunity to talk too. I think that the one word that comes to mind is autonomy. I want to make sure you understand exactly what I mean. I don't mean the aircraft flying by itself, the vehicle driving by itself, but pilots and drivers enabled by autonomy that allows them to take some of the tasks that would be demanding their time and their thought, and let a machine do that so that they can focus on the most important tasks. In a training environment, that's good. That'll actually mitigate risk because more focus on the most important or higher risk tasks that pilots or drivers have to do. But in combat, it's huge because you want to focus on the enemy. Anything you're doing to not focus on the enemy takes you away from focusing on the enemy. And so autonomy is probably the single most important thing. But folks want to say that, okay, let the aircraft just fly itself and we'll have people. It's not that simple. Humans have to be part of the loop for a whole host of reasons that I don't have time to talk about. But that's my thoughts from the Army.
So Bill Lesher from the Navy here very quickly. I would offer live virtual constructive training is a core area that, and complementary with flying on the range, is a powerful improvement to the quality of the training. And I believe as well, it'll be non-discretionary in the sense that it is a way for us to train high-end capability and high-end tactics, techniques, and procedures that we don't want to reveal more broadly to anybody who might be watching. But a strong push for any number of reasons to get after live virtual constructive type technology. The other thing I would highlight, the Navy is to so much of our high-end aviation training at Fallon, Nevada, and we're quite constrained by what we see we need to operate to get the proper ranges of weapons, et cetera. And again, these can work together as we work to broaden the range, also to bring this type of technology on board. Over.
Admiral, on that point, let me say that we made a push in this committee to expand Fallon last year, and we ran into some resistance in the Natural Resources Committee. I think we need to make another push there and not give up on that, so that your naval aviators have the facilities they need to do proper training, especially in this new day and age.
Yes, sir. It is a top legislative priority for our leadership, clearly for our aviators, and I look forward to working with the committee and continue to get after that this year.
Maybe I'll just turn it back to the chairman, and for the sake of time.
Thank you, Mr. Lamborn. If any of the committee members have a quick question that absolutely has to be asked, raise your hand and go for it. Mr. Green.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Just a quick question for any of the witnesses today. Are there resources that we could authorize besides money? Is it a training system or more virtual training before they get in the cockpit that would enhance or decrease accidents? I'm thinking about what we can do. I know y'all know what you have to do to keep accidents from happening. What do we need to do to support you in addition to just dollars?
I'll take a crack at that if it's all right, Congressman. I think one of the things, we're all entering this journey together, and we've touched on a lot with the advent of technology and bringing on new systems, bringing on the things that my colleagues were talking about, live virtual constructive systems. But I think fundamentally where we could continue to use your help in moving forward on this journey together is the manner in which we're going to mature these is different from traditional acquisition programs. And so sometimes if we're going to innovate fast, we need to be able to fail fast and have a new way, but still have you preserve your oversight. We know that is important. So we're going to be moving into areas where we're going to be investigating technologies with respect to command and control and leveraging these in ways that don't look like a traditional acquisition profile with milestone A, milestone B, and then it ends up with a shiny object over at the end. But the idea that we can work together as a joint force and investigate these new technologies, fail fast and fail cheap, while at the same time giving you the confidence that you have the oversight so we can continue this trust relationship. And once we do that and we can transition into this new way of developing capabilities in a way that has the proper congressional oversight and trust that the funding is going to the right spot, I think that's going to be so important to allow us to accelerate. And it'll be better warfighting, it'll be better training. It's just be a better approach because there's a new way that we have to be able to develop field capabilities that's different from the 20th century things that sometimes we're still shackled with. That'd be my input.
Yeah, I want to see, organizations that learn in real time, and I know you do too, and I just want to make sure you're resourced to have real-time performance improvement, process improvement happening across the formations. And if there's anything we need to do to make sure you've got it, that's what I'm asking. So thank you for that.
Mr. Green, we're going to let it go at that. I think Mr. Moore had a question that he wanted to ask.
Not the threshold, Chairman. We're good.
Good. Elaine?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Well, we could let the other three witnesses answer Mr. Moore's question if you'd like to, and then I'm going to shut this thing down.
Mr. Chairman, Bill Letcher here. I'll take a stab at the question as well to build on what General Alden said. One thing I think the committee can do, and it's probably self-evident, and I know the committee already is working hard at it, is to continue to be an advocate in the broader Congress for readiness. Periodically you hear the self-talk in the building here about there are strong constituent and even policy advocates for certain pieces of hardware, but where's the advocacy for readiness? And I always educate them. We have those advocates in these readiness committees. And I think it's important for us to educate more broadly, even outside the defense oversight committees, on the importance of readiness. And so I again, looking forward to working in partnership with the committee on that message. The congressman asked a question earlier that we didn't broadly answer about, hey, what happens if top line comes down? My side picture of that is we are not going to accept a hollow force. And so we are not going to accept increased risk, but we would for sure have a smaller and less lethal Navy as we adapt to that smaller top line and do it in a responsible way by not having a hollow force. And so I think that is part of the message as well. Over.
General Martin, you want to add, or General Thomas, you can.
Congressman,
If you like.
I'm gonna give the straight answer of I endorse what both the Navy and the Air Force recommended. Both of those areas are important, especially the advocacy for OMA dollars and readiness resources for our formations. It's huge.
And Chairman, I would add to all of my colleagues, points that your advocacy for readiness is key. As Admiral Lesher said, if we see a reduction in top line, we are going to maintain our readiness, but it will force us to be a smaller force. And then I would just say that from a technology standpoint, I think that we're moving in the right direction. But I would also support General Alvin's comments that supporting what I would call acquisition agility from the committee is going to continue to be important, while at the same time preserving the oversight of the Congress.
I've got about another hour, maybe 2 hours questions I'd love to get to all four of you. And some of them are slightly off the subject matter. With regard to and acquisitions in the Air Force, we had a GAO report to us yesterday about satellite systems and GPS systems. Rather concerning. And that's an issue we take up with General Alvin and your colleagues a little later. But clearly there's an acquisition issue that goes across really all of the platforms, particularly the new technologies that all of you talked about. With regard to the readiness, we've had many discussions about maintaining the equipment. Looking this morning at the early bird brief, and I noticed that I've become an advocate of not going to buy anything new until we maintain what is old. And I mean it. I suspect I may lose that battle, but I'm not going to go down easy. So we're way into maintaining the equipment that we have. And you gentlemen have heard me on this before, and I really, really mean it. The other part, this hearing was specifically on the safety and accidents, but it cuts across to the other things that this committee has been working on, maintenance and availability of equipment, so that you had the chance to practice. So we'll continue on those. For our presenters, I really appreciate the hearing today. You were forthcoming. You answered the questions of the committee in a way that was as complete as possible in the time allowed. To my committee members and staff that are on, most every question leads to another question. And so if you have that follow-up question, let us know. And maybe it'll be a written, maybe it'll be a briefing, formal or informal. So follow up to all of the committee members, and particularly to Mr. Lamborn, who has a specific task on the minority side. I look forward to working with all of the witnesses, Mr. General Thomas, General Martin, Alvin, and Admiral Lesher. We've got things to do together. We'll be doing a new NDAA, and we're beginning that process now. Some ideas have come from this hearing and from the other hearings. I'll let it be known, anybody that wants to listen, we're going to drive the readiness issue across the board. Things that we didn't talk about here, other things that we will talk about. And along the way, hopefully it'll turn out better in the future. Thank you so very, very much to everybody that's been participating on this. A big shout out to the staff, the minority staff, the majority staff. Did a great work lining it up, and to the witnesses. Thank you. Have a good afternoon, evening, and we'll look forward to our next opportunity to talk. Thank you all very much. This hearing is formally adjourned.